Good evening. It is 6 o'clock and today is May 31st, 2022. We are calling to order this special meeting of the City Council. Janet, will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Diaz?
Yes.
Councilmember Juan?
Here.
Councilmember Wolf?
Here.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
Here.
Mayor Clayton?
I am here as well. And Janet, will you roll the meeting protocol video, please?
Tonight's meeting will be conducted both in person and remotely via Zoom. As a courtesy and technology permitting, members of the public may continue to provide live remote oral comment via the Zoom video conferencing platform. However, the City cannot guarantee that the public's access to teleconferencing technology will be uninterrupted, and technical difficulties may occur from time to time. This meeting is also being webcast on the City of Clayton's website. The Mayor will call upon its council, presenters, staff, and other speakers by name and ask that they speak clearly and state their names before giving comments or remarks. The Mayor will call on members of the public that are attending in person first, and then shall call on members of the public that are participating via Zoom. Persons participating via webcast and Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members of the public participating in person wishing to speak on an item may submit a speaker card with the city clerk. Members of the public participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9 and the Mayor will call upon them at the appropriate time. Telephone attendees will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their name, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received by the Clayton City Clerk by 5 p.m. today will be entered into the record, but will not be read out loud. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they are free to do so and should raise their hand, and the Mayor will call upon them at the appropriate time. The chat feature is not active. In order to get the full Zoom experience, please make sure your application is up to date.
Thank you for that, Janet. I appreciate it. We're done with item number 2. We're going to move on to item number 3, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And item number 3 is closed. We're going to move on to item number 4, which is the consent calendar. And as it being a special meeting, we're going to keep it short tonight. And the only thing on the consent calendar is the minutes from last meeting. Do any council members have any comments or want to discuss it? Second. Good. First, but before that, because it is an item on the consent calendar, we will put it out to public comment. Janet, can you tell me if there are any hands out there who would like to comment on the consent calendar?
Mayor Cloven, there are no hands raised on this item.
And just out of curiosity, how many people do we have out there in the land?
Currently, we have 11 attendees in Zoom.
Thank you. That's good information to know. Appreciate that. We'll bring it back to the council. We do need a first before we can have a second. Can we get somebody to got a first from Vice Mayor Tillman, a second from Councilmember Diaz. Janet, will you call the rolls, please?
Councilmember Diaz?
Yes.
Councilmember Juan?
Aye.
Councilmember Wolf?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
Aye.
Mayor Cloven?
Aye. Thank you. That concludes item number 4. And because this is a special meeting and not one of our regular scheduled meetings, we're not going to have a council reports night or a city council, city manager report. We'll dispense with that and move right on into public comment for non-agenda items, things that are not on the agenda tonight. And as always, I please ask of you to address the city council as a whole. We're all one body doing the best we can, and do not single out a particular individual. And please speak with respect and kindness in your words. And with that, Janet, do we have any hands raised?
Mayor Cloven, I currently do not have any hands raised on this item via Zoom.
And seeing no hands in the room, with that, item number 5 is closed, and public comment is closed, and we'll move on to item number 6, which is public hearings. And we're going to start off with item number 6A, which is the introduction and waive the first reading of the ordinance amending sections 8.04 and 8.06 of the Clayton Municipal Code relating to solid waste collection pursuant to SB 1383. And with that, we'll turn that over to you, Raina.
Great, thank you, Mayor and members of the Council. Just a very brief report on this item this evening. This item brings forward the first reading for changes to the city's code related to requirements associated with state law, SB 1383, the short-lived Climate Pollutant Organic Waste Methane Emissions Reduction Act of 2016. That will explain why we refer to it as SB 1383, because its official title is quite long. And basically this ordinance will bring us into compliance with state law in terms of the organics recycling that is required. So a couple of things about the next steps. The report talks about what requirements programmatically we need to include in terms of service to households and businesses, outreach, food, waste recovery, etc. A couple of things before I open it up, obviously, to questions from council and public comment is that in addition to this item related to SB 1383, there was a previous other item, AB 1826, which had to do primarily with the commercial organics recycling, and that went into place earlier than the household 1383 requirements, which came into place this year. So 1826 requires commercial and multifamily organics recycling. We are working with Republic Services to create a fully compliant program. We are not yet compliant with AB 1826, so we need to do that essentially at the same time as we bring our SB 1383 program into compliance. One of our challenges in Clayton, as with other small communities around the state, is if we don't have a lot of commercial businesses or multifamily housing, it's challenging for a hauler to service those accounts. And so we're working with Republic to look at opportunities potentially to essentially piggyback with another community on the hauler's routes in that community, because Clayton alone would not make a sufficiently long route to be cost effective. The real next step with AB 1826 will be late summer when it comes back to the council in order to set a rate for Republic to charge for those services. We don't have a rate in our rate schedule because we have not provided those services before, so we will have a rate discussion prior to October when that must be implemented in order to be into compliance. With SB 1383, once we have adopted the ordinance and we've gotten our AB 1826 program moving forward, we will be negotiating with Republic Services on our overall franchise agreement, which does expire this year. And we will incorporate all of the required 1383 programs in that. It will ultimately result, and you'll start to see some of this sooner, SB 1383 requires certain color lids for certain types of containers, and so our containers are slightly odd colors for the services that they cover. Typically blue is recycling. We don't have that here, but ultimately all of the lids, containers as they're needed, but all of the lids will need to be replaced with the correct color lids for the organics recycling, and all of the program components and the outreach, et cetera, will start long before the requirement for households to actually begin putting that waste stream into service so that Republic can collect it and deal with it. So what's in front of the council this evening is really just the introduction of the ordinance that brings us into compliance with state law. It will come back, barring any changes, with on the consent calendar at our next meeting, which would be the 7th of June, so next week, for adoption so that we can move forward with getting all those pieces underway to continue our compliance efforts with all of the organics recycling. And with that, I'm available to answer any questions.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of questions. I've got to take that off. Okay. What month does our Republic Services contract expire?
I believe it expires in December of this year.
Okay. And do you know, wow, that's really round. Do you know if they are already up and running in regards to these, to SB 1383 or AB 1826 in neighboring cities?
They're absolutely, definitely up and running on AB 1826 in neighboring cities. They are, I believe, starting implementation for 1383 in some of their communities and rolling through amending franchise agreements as they get those done and going through implementation. The implementation for larger communities, most of the communities were intended to implement before January 1 of this year. A month or two ago, the council approved essentially a notice or an application to Cal Recycling that said, we know that we need to do this. We're a little behind timing-wise, and so we are on record as planning to move forward with our 1383. But there are other communities around us who have started implementation already.
And in the negotiation process with them, are we in any jeopardy of not continuing on with them, continuing our contract with them? And if so, do we have an alternate in place, a potential alternate?
We certainly could put it out for a full request for proposals for service. At this point, it makes more sense for us to see if we can reach a negotiation for an extension of that franchise agreement. This will be a relatively larger review of the franchise agreement because it has these new components that need to come into place as well. But we've already started our conversations with them, and I think the most challenging thing for everyone, and it's been true across the board in communities, is that the changes required on the processing side as well as some on the collection side for the organics recycling are quite expensive. And so ratepayers across the state can expect to see, if they haven't already seen, pretty significant rate increases. And our ratepayers are going to face very much the same. So the negotiation will be around making sure that we're compliant, but we're also as cost effective as possible, because any costs that Republic wants to pass through to our customers is something we'll want to really make sure that we have a good handle on.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Warren?
So just to clarify, when this is all said and done, are we going to now have a fourth bin? Because currently there's garbage, recycling, garbage which is blue, recycling, green, and organic. That's the intent.
So in a number of communities, it's been integrated with the green waste collection because it essentially is all compostable material. So I don't know the final answer to that question yet. The goal would be not to have a fourth cart or fourth bin, because that's a lot of containers. It's great if you have a huge lot or a huge side yard, but if you don't, it's very cumbersome. So that will be part of the discussion with Republic in terms of how they're handling that material.
Okay. Just as a PSA, you are allowed to get in Clayton an additional green and brown bin at no cost. Call Republic Services. They will drop one off at your house.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you. Years ago, I attended a mayor's conference that talked about this, and they talked about maybe even a fifth bin with regard to, I think it was dirt or whatever was supposed to go in there. Anyway, bottom line is the question is about colors. There was a lively discussion about the colors of the statewide bins that were all going to be the same color, and that they were going to, the same colors, and they were going to come to all the different cities for a polling on that. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. Do you know, has there been a settle up on what the colors are going to be? Because I remember there's some places in Southern California using a light blue bin for something, and there was a debate over the colors. So just wondering if they've settled up on that.
SB 1383 does specify lid colors, and I believe that's where this debate has sort of landed, is as long as it's sort of an easy visual for collectors and customers to have that visual reference. But I don't believe it's going to be subject to anything more at this point than the lid colors, but you will see that standardized as a result of the organic law. And if you've seen it already, the yellow lids are typically the organics. If you get out into other places in the community outside of Clayton.
Are there any other questions from council members? If not, we will move it to public comment and see if there are any questions out there in the public on this particular item. Janet, do you have any hands?
Mayor Cloven, I do have one hand from Wendy. Wendy, as I promote you to panelist, you will have 3 minutes to speak regarding this item. And if you can please unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me?
Wendy, we can hear you. Wendy, if you can hear me, you are on and we could hear your voice.
Wendy, if you can please unmute your microphone.
Oh boy.
Wendy, are you still there, bus etiquette? We can hear you. If you can see me, go ahead and speak.
My request simply was
For this meeting, days prior to this meeting, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So it would be great if you could post it on the Zoom meeting.
Thank you, Wendy. I heard your question. Excellent. Wendy, I heard your question. If you go to the city's website, you can get on to City Council and just Google Clayton City Council, California agendas. And it will show you a link to all the agendas, and scroll down to you hit May 31st, and there's a button, a link says agenda, and you'll be able to download it as a PDF and see what's going on tonight.
Realize, of course, that that's a ridiculous number of steps for something to find. I was very appreciative of
Janet, is there an easier way for her to do that?
Wendy, another way to locate the current agenda is from... Wendy, let's connect offline and see if you are on our agenda list, because when I do send out the agenda link, it does take you directly to our current agenda. Another place to find the agenda on our website is on the home page of www.claytonca.gov, If you scroll down to the bottom left-hand side, it'll say City Council Current Agenda, and that'll take you to our current agenda.
So I'm only providing feedback to you guys, but I literally went on that website over and over again. So you're very familiar with the website, but
Do with it what you will, but I actually hunted.
do with it what you will, but I actually hunted.
Wendy, thank you for your feedback. We'll definitely take that under advisement and see if there's a way to make that easier in the future, and appreciate your comments. And with that, Janet, are there any hands for this specific item 6A that's on the agenda?
Mayor Cloven, I do not have any other hands raised on this item.
Excellent. And with that, public comment is closed on this item 6A. We bring it back to council for discussion. Are there any items for to discuss among the council members? Councilmember Diaz, please.
Earlier today, City Manager Reyna and I discussed one of the things that's been in the works with, and this is not specifically pertaining to this, but I know that Republic Services has been trying to transition. We are one of the few cities, I think, maybe the only city left that doesn't have the blue waste material buckets, toters, that are really for recycle and not for trash. And I know that this is something that they've been working on, and I asked her to follow up with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Diaz. Any other items for discussion on this particular item? And if I'm reading us correctly, you're asking us to waive the first reading. Is there an action associated with that?
Yes, a motion to introduce the ordinance and waive the first reading would be appropriate.
Is there a motion to do so? Got a first by Vice Mayor Tillman.
A second.
I got a second from Councilmember Wolf. Janet, will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Diaz?
Yes.
Councilmember Juan? Aye. Councilmember Wolf?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
Aye.
Mayor Cloven?
Aye. And with that, the item passes unanimously. And we'll move on the agenda from items 6A and public hearings on to action items. And we'll start off with item number 7A, which is an update on the community engagement efforts pertaining to the city-owned downtown site in Town Center, and provide direction to the steps on potential next steps. With that, I believe we're going to our Community Development Director, Ms. Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As the mayor stated, what we are here to do tonight is to present back some information to the City Council regarding an update, essentially, on the community engagement efforts related to the downtown site, which is located just on the south side of Clayton Road and east of Oak Street. Just as a reminder, this process started a little over a year and a half ago when the council gave staff direction to initiate a process to obtain community input on what to do with that piece of land that is city-owned. Prior to that, there had been previous studies that the city had conducted through consultants, including a Transwestern study and an economic planning systems study. Both of those found that there was insufficient insufficient residential to really support a vibrant commercial core in the town center. There was also some suggestion that the commercial uses in the downtown be diversified to include not just retail, but also service uses, even some possibly small industrial uses, and offices as businesses that could attract customers that then could support retail. So since the council initially gave direction, the city council hired the firm MIG to initiate that public engagement process. And that was in January of 2021. About 4 months later, the city council authorized a second contract with MIG to update the housing element. And the city took the opportunity to leverage those two processes to facilitate engagement both for the housing element as well as for the feedback for the downtown site. And since then, there have been primarily three public engagement efforts. We did have a community workshop that was related to the housing element primarily, but that was an opportunity for people to comment generally on housing opportunity sites, possibly including the town center sites. There was also an online survey in Maptionnaire, which was activated between November and December of last year. And the Balancing Act survey, which I know some of the folks here were very helpful in promoting. That was another online opportunity for people to, as part of the housing element effort, identify housing opportunity sites and potential development on each site that was identified in that tool. With respect to the downtown site, in Balancing Act, responses were varied. There were some folks who indicated they didn't want to see any housing there. There were some folks who indicated they wanted to see a lot of housing there and put density there at the highest potential, which was 30 units an acre. And then there were some who kind of fell in the middle where they commented, I'm okay, I don't really want housing here, but I'm okay with it as long as it's vertically or horizontally mixed with commercial uses. The results of the Maptionnaire survey also were kind of, differed. There was no consistent answer, but there were 3 preferred uses that received the most number of people that identified those uses as their preferred alternatives. And those were entertainment uses, which includes restaurants and recreational activities, arts and cultural uses, and commercial uses. And then there were also a few folks who did indicate mixed housing and commercial as a possible, and housing as a potential use as well. Those fell a little lower on the ranking of the preferred uses. Of the 3 uses that were identified as the top 3 preferred, the memo that's attached to your staff report goes through some discussion of potential benefits and constraints and opportunities for each of those uses. Generally speaking, when you have an attraction use like a cultural center or a performing arts venue, those types of uses can be supportive of retail uses, because when you have people coming to see a show or to go to a concert, they may also patronize businesses. They go to dinner beforehand. They may shop for a few minutes before their show starts. The challenge with those types of uses, however, is that if the city was to operate a facility like that, there is costs initially for design and construction. There's costs ongoing for operations and maintenance. You have to program it. Those uses can also be a bit challenging as far as supporting retail, because generally you don't have events happening every night. So the infrequency of those events that draw those people in doesn't necessarily support commercial uses as much as would be necessary to make those retail uses really viable. Additionally, with regard to retail and supporting retail, there's just not a lot of residential down there in the town center. Residential uses, by contrast, would provide more of a consistent customer base. There's not a single attraction. There's people living there. Another constraint to possibly developing the site with any one of the 3 preferred uses is that because this is city-owned land, the Surplus Lands Act applies, which is a state statute. And basically, the short version of it is that if a city determines a land to be surplus and decides that it's not going to use it for any sort of public purpose, the first offer of sale is to affordable housing developers. So the desired commercial uses, the desired recreational uses of the city that respondents identified may not be possible under application of that act. So there are a few things that the city has the option to do. One is to receive the report and say thank you very much and get on with your day. You can also provide direction to staff if so desired. We would, as noted in the memo, suggest that any future engagement efforts recognize that options may be put out to the public that the public maybe doesn't want to see, although those uses, as I said, have some constraints as far as costs for operation, maintenance, construction, design. But that being said, as I said, the council could give direction to staff to do some more research, to do some more public engagement, or possibly to look at some different alternatives and to do a very high-level analysis, a little more refined than what's in the memo, but high-level analysis of the costs and benefits of each option. With that, I will mute my microphone again and invite any comments or questions that any council members have.
Thank you, Dana. Appreciate it. I'll open it up to my fellow council members. Councilmember 1.
Can I ask a clarifying question regarding the Surplus Lands Act? If I understood you correctly, if we assume that there was a willing buyer to develop the land into something that was amenable to all involved, does the way that you describe the Surplus Lands Act, does that mean that it would first need to be offered for sale to a willing buyer that is, I think, that was characterized as an affordable housing developer? Is that accurate?
Yes, the first offers would need to be made to affordable housing developers. If all of them declined or none of them showed interest, then the city could pursue potentially another buyer.
And what characteristics would that offer take? Like, we would have to put it out to bid for a certain time duration, or is that specified anywhere?
I can't recall the statute well enough to say if there's a minimum amount of time. Okay, sorry.
Don't mean to jump in,
will
Dana.
not.
I just thought I could clarify. I think we have too many mics on. I apologize. If we are interested in selling it for a non-governmental purpose, then we would need to provide notice to both affordable housing groups, I would say like open space park groups, school facilities, and then if we received a notice of intent from any one of these groups, we would need to enter into good faith negotiations for a 90-day period. It doesn't require us to sell the property for less than fair market value, but there is just a process and a procedure to move forward before we could make a sale to a group that wasn't one of the groups that I had just mentioned. And if we receive more than one interest of a notice of intent, there's a priority on who you start negotiating with.
And then you said for non-public use, is that defined? Like, how broadly is that defined?
I am pulling up the code section. They've tried to narrow the definition. When we would go to sell it, it says, let's see, they have specifically excluded, and I think this is what you are really asking about. It is, let me get the right section. It shall not include commercial or industrial uses or activities, including non-governmental retail, entertainment, or office development. Property disposed of for the sole purpose of investment or generation of revenue shall not be considered necessary for the agency's use. So those would be all things excluded.
Excluded from consideration of public use. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
The technical term was agency use. I used public use, but
okay.
Same.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the council?
Mr. Mayor.
I just have one. Oh, no, you go ahead. You go. No, go ahead.
So how, thank you. Just to clarify, how does that affect an already for sale building, Florida Square, for instance?
This only applies to land the city owns. So the Surplus Land Act only applies to specific public agencies.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
Thank you, Mayor. Director Ayers, can you just give a couple more examples of some of the constraints that you had mentioned? I'm trying to find my note specifically. You had mentioned that you guys, if you were directed to, could come back and delve a little bit deeper into some of the constraints that we might come up against. Can you give more examples of those?
I don't know if it's necessary that we would come back with more constraints as much as I've said kind of broadly an entertainment facility or some sort of a park, for example, is going to have costs in terms of construction, maintenance, design. A private commercial development would have fewer. So it's not so much that there are more constraints, it's just more that we can possibly try to focus down for you a little more what the potential costs and benefits of each scenario would be relative to the other.
So the obvious question to me is, if we keep it exactly the way that it is, in its currently undeveloped state, would there be any penalty or cost associated with keeping it as it is, other than the fact that it's just not generating any revenue?
Amala can jump in and start screaming if I say something wrong here, but I don't believe there's anything in state law that says you have to sell the land. There is only a process that she's described that you have to follow if you decide to sell it. But if the city decided to keep it, that's appropriate. Of course, there would be some ongoing costs, and it's getting back to Vice Mayor Tillman's question. There may be some ongoing costs related to, you're still going to have to keep the weeds down, you may still have to put down, you're still going to have to trim trees. So there may be some limited ongoing maintenance costs. But beyond that, there's nothing that the city is obligated to do to dispose of the property.
Excellent. Then I'm going to go kind of a hypothetical situation. Is there anything that's being talked about in Sacramento that would possibly take the use of that land in its current state as being undeveloped and as it is out of our hands and put it into another entity's control of what to do with that parcel?
I am not aware of any bills going through the legislature right now on that regard.
And there's nothing in the Surplus Land Act that specifically would that's the clarification that I need. Thank you. Councilmember Warren, please.
I forgot to ask. When we refer to the survey and the percentages of folks that responded with various suggestions, what was the denominator? Like, it doesn't say how many participants. Did I miss it?
You didn't, and I forgot to print out the survey, although it is an attachment to your housing element staff report. So if you want to give me a moment, I will dig through all 300 pages, and I'm
sure I'll find it. If there's a term I can search for, because I have it here. I can search.
So are you talking about the Mapshare question or balancing act? The Mapshare survey?
First one.
The first one.
It's not necessary at this moment, but if you...
The Mapshare survey had about 450 hits. We got about 100 plus sort of full responses, if you will. So the likely denominator, we don't have a for each question, but it's about 100.
About 100. Got it. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
I just have a couple more questions, especially since we have others that are on the line, if they are still on the line, Janet. Can we dig a little bit more? I'm looking at MIG's recommendations, and you had mentioned it as well. There was caution in pursuing further community engagement or public engagement. But can you give examples of, I'm just going to read you what it reads. Community members often respond negatively to learning that the options presented to them must include features that are necessary for the option's success, but that community members do not support. Likewise, community members may react adversely to learning that adequate resources are not available for implementation of a preferred option. So if we were to direct staff to pursue a high-level fiscal analysis of the impacts of various options, for example, the entertainment one, how much time, meaning i.e. months, would it take for staff to prepare that?
It's certainly not in our work program right now. For the next couple of months, I would say that a lot of staff time is going to be focused on budget and fees, and after that, a lot of my time will be focused on the housing element. So I would say at best it would be possibly toward the end of this year.
So if there are questions from the public, or they're speaking to any council members asking for staff to develop that, then that's the reason for my question. We can at least caution them that they wouldn't have an answer to that before year end, because there are other competing priorities, which then leads me to say that is there an issue with coming back to you later and requesting that? Is there a timeline for that request to go in? Okay.
And if I could just add briefly, there is no timeline, so that could certainly come back at any time. The other piece is there is a relationship between the downtown site and the housing element process, and so, I would say at least until we get through the next item and perhaps through its ultimate adoption toward the very end of this calendar year, that may be part of the process of the determination about how that site plays into the housing element sites. And so, the decision can't entirely be made in isolation from that housing element process. And so there may be some benefit to waiting until ultimately this, late fall or, end of the calendar year to potentially provide that further direction in terms of, if there's a decision that site will either be in or out of the housing element process.
Any other questions from council before we open to public comment? And with that, we will open it to public comment. If there are people out there who would like to discuss this item before we bring it back to council discussion, you have 3 minutes to say your piece and what you'd like on this particular item about the downtown parcel. Janet, do we have any hands?
Mayor Cloven, I do have one hand raised. Kathy, I'm going to allow you to speak as an attendee. If you can please unmute your microphone, you will have 3 minutes.
Hi, this call was an accident. I hit the wrong button. Sorry.
Thank you, Kathy.
Mayor Cloven, I do not have any other hands raised via Zoom on this item.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead and close public comment, since I see no hands in the audience either, and bring it back to council discussion. And again, what we're doing tonight is giving our staff direction on the potential next steps related to this site. So if there are any items of conversation or discussion, please let me know. Raise your hand.
She's our consultant from MIG who'll be on for the housing element. So we were struggling a little with the technology. So once we got her promoted, we're like, we're not taking it away again.
Go ahead, Councilmember Wolf.
So despite cautions, I think the direction should be that we engage the public. I think it's important that we find out what the heads are, where their heads are at in the public with regard to this. I think we made mistakes in the past without including the public that upset the town more than is necessary.
Isn't that what the survey did then?
Yes, we've had
That's
at least,
exactly what the survey was intended to do, unless we're saying that we don't think they did an adequate job.
But in my opinion, I don't know that there's a big enough, cross-section of people with regard to this survey.
So do you believe that the survey was inadequate in its level of response?
Well, I think that there may be somewhat of a malaise in the town yet with regard to what's actually going on. And the one thing that I would want to avoid is to have hundreds of people in here after decisions are made saying they weren't involved in the process.
I think we learned that at the past, the confidence interval for 95% with the survey response here is somewhere in the neighborhood of like 200, right? So at 100, what's your degree of confidence for 95 percentile? I think your rate of error is like 12% or something like that.
the other thing to remember is that the two surveys, the Matchner and the Balancing Act, were self-selected survey responses. They were not a random digit dial statistically structured survey, and so you don't end up with the same kind of confidence levels. What you end up with is a sense. We have also, in the broader conversations about the housing element, offered opportunities to speak. I think the question is, is there a process, a type of process that might be more likely to draw larger numbers? And I don't know what that is. And I don't know what the timing on that would be.
And I find it odd that the survey, for whatever value it provides, there's a very few number of folks that looked to see housing in the downtown or in this downtown lot. Yet I believe that as we talk about the next item, we'll see that there's a required zoning for housing on some of the opportunity sites that we have had there for many cycles. I don't mean to jump it down, but I think that's what you're going to tell us at some point. And so whether or not we talk to people anymore, it's almost a foregone conclusion on what we can actually do with the property. So it doesn't seem like there's that many options there.
I don't think there's many people out there who want to see it be put out through public bidding in the Surplus Land Act concept of putting it out to bid for some affordable housing or nonprofit to work on that property downtown. I think that the appetite for that is low. We're at an interesting crux because this is kind of hitting all aspects of where we are as a city council right now, because to do anything more with the property than it exists in its current vacant state is going to cost funds which we don't have. It just is. Whether even improvement in the slightest is going to require funds we don't have and would require us to go talk to the public anyways. So we're at this really good nexus of being able to talk to our public about really what our challenges are from a fiscal standpoint relative to that, and relative to future development, if any, on that parcel, whether it be for entertainment purposes or for housing purposes. It's kind of a damned if we do, damned if we don't place. And I think that's a great place to communicate to our community, and it's a good place to come from and say, hey, these are the challenges that we face.
I would say we're almost in the best possible scenario. We need to do nothing. It costs us relatively nothing to do that, and we own the property. So nothing, the things that people don't want don't need to happen. That's a win.
I think for a future day, there are ways we can consider to somehow derive revenue from that property in its current state. That's not a conversation for right now. But again, just putting it out where we are right now, I think is important for the city and the residents to hear the challenges that this conversation and what Vegas brought to our. I mean, their summary is pretty darn clear. pretty darn clear. So, any other council comments on what direction we need to would like to give to the council, to their staff?
I would actually like to see even greater rigor or process should in the future it is ever decided that we do something that is different than what it currently is. Like, I think that we can give the public more comfort if we clarify that there will be more process if the time ever comes to pass that we want to do something different than what it currently is. I'd like to, so if we were to say what direction to give staff, when you have time, I would say that we, when you have time, that we consider ways that we could ensure that the process, should it ever come, requires a certain procedure that is to be determined later.
I'm not sure I understand. I thought that there was already a procedure in place. There are way too many microphones on.
So whatever the procedure is, which I can't name all the steps, more of that. So if it requires, like, let's say pretend for a moment that it requires 2 public hearings and a majority vote, that we say we do something. Make it like 4 and a supermajority, something greater. That's what I'm suggesting. I don't know, I'm not like wedded to any one particular thing, but that's just an example of like what we can do if we if we adopt some process by which we would have to go through at a future time to ensure that to address some of the concerns that people didn't know or for whatever reason. That way it will involve people in a greater sense should the thing ever come to pass. If it doesn't, then it doesn't have to.
I'm trying to follow along with you. Can you mute your mic?
Sorry.
I'm trying to follow along, so I'm going to bring it back to staff just to ask a clarifying question then. In the scenario that you mentioned, Mala, I need to find my note, about the affordable housing, the 90-day good faith negotiations, et cetera, that has to happen regardless. I'm assuming you mean if we want to sell the property, right? So these things have to happen. There is no option. Can we make it harder the way that he's saying? So, or not harder. Can we ensure that there's more public engagement around that process, or they don't get a say? We still have to do this 90 days regardless with the groups that you mentioned.
We have to do that to comply with state law.
Okay, so that's what I'm trying to put
let me
those two
see
things
if I can,
together.
for sure we have to do that because rules. So for example, if we said the highest use of this is to someone wants to come in and build an entertainment center, so we're going to do that, and that's not an agency use. Therefore, we need to engage the process that you described earlier. So I would go before that step, to make that decision that the highest best use is something else that would lead to this thing. Call it, now you need a supermajority to even get to that point. That way, everyone is all on the same page. Or maybe you need a unanimous decision to do that. That way, we know, and you need to have some type of prescribed engagement. Whatever that happens to be, I would just suggest that process be as rigorous as permissible to get there.
I think I understand kind of what you're getting at, and I'd kind of like to split that into 2 pieces. One is to just clarify that, because you made reference to sites that have been in the housing element process before and what the requirements are for them. So the council still has complete discretion over whether or not that site goes into the next housing element or not. If it goes in, it has some certain constraints on it because it's been listed before. But the council could still choose to exclude that site provided that throughout the rest of the city, we meet all of the rest of the requirements. So one, potential path is to say, hold on doing anything right now with the downtown site. Go through the housing element process, make those decisions. Ultimately, you approve a housing element, it goes off to HCD at the end of the year. And then come back with a process as to, depending, of course, on what the choice is, but come back with a process for what the more detailed outline of tasks and procedures that we would recommend going through to reach the decision about what that next use is. So that, you've got a little bit of the bifurcation of, are you doing the housing thing, are you not doing the housing thing in terms of including it. But then ultimately, if it's going to be something else, what's the process for determining exactly what that something else is going to be? And so I think that's how I understand your request. And I would just sort of slot it in that process, particularly because of workload, but also because I think it makes the most sense to allow for the time for the debate on the housing elements.
Yeah, I think that captures what I was going for. And I would clarify that it's not necessarily specific only to this downtown site, but I would say that the process should encompass any site that the city owns. And you could create some kind of dollar thresholds for the sale of city-owned property to cover that. Something north of X dollars would be covered under this process and south of it would not. Something like that. I mean, the details need to be worked out, but that would be my suggestion.
Can I clarify something real quickly? I think you're understanding if it's going to be a project that would be bid out for sale for commercial or other type of use, or their housing use. So if this were something to be a public use, let's say we want to make it a sport court for summertime and a skating rink in the wintertime, where it'd be a public use along the lines of entertainment, where we were to want to dedicate funds for that so it could be used all year round purposes. This would not fall into a category like that. This would be something we'd have to find funding from a special use tax that we would put to our voters, but would not require to go out to bid necessarily through the Surplus Land Act. Is that correct?
Correct. But what I heard, I think Councilmember Juan say was that before, quote unquote, we decide that it should be a skating rink, whatever that is, that there be that broader process, that more prescribed process.
Maybe you even want to say if it goes for agency use, you take one pathway. If it goes for non-agency use, you take the more rigorous pathway. I mean, if we all decide that we want to make it a park or an awesome whatever.
Again, this is hypo.
Then maybe that as an agency use, you can, I'm just going to use that term because as you said, you can take the policy or the procedure that is extant now, and maybe if you go towards the other route and you go for non-agency use, you kick into like tier B or something. Because I think that makes it a little easier.
I don't have a challenge about looking at a two-pronged attack that way. As far as putting something together in the future, if you're looking at for direction right now, I think we kind of know where we need to be right now relative to it, and that'll be part of the conversation. The next item is what type of overlay, if any, we decide to put on that as part of the housing element. Is that correct? Is that enough direction for you right now as far as this item?
Yes, thank you.
Is there any other comments from council members? With that, we will close item number 7A on the agenda. And we'll move to action number item 7B, which is a comment session on the City of Clayton public review of draft housing element for the 6th cycle, which is 2023 to 5:31. And we'll bring that back to you, Dana.
So I am going to introduce Laura Stetson, who is the consultant leading the preparation of our housing element. She'll show up shortly. I'll just keep talking until she does. And anyway, the council is aware that we initiated the housing element update. Okay, we can't see you. Our televisions are a little not cooperational. But we did initiate the update to the housing element process about a year ago now. MIG has been the firm that has been working on that update. Laura Stetson is the lead at MIG, managing the team who is doing our housing element update as well as the environmental analysis of the housing element update. She's going to give you a brief presentation reminding you about what the housing element is, what we're doing tonight, and the purpose of tonight's comment session is just to get feedback from the public and from council members about the draft housing element. We will continue to accept comments for about the next 20 days through June 20th. And I will turn it over to Laura. She is there.
Thank you, Dana. And I'm going to go ahead and share screen. There seems to be feedback.
It should be better now, Laura. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Great, that works. Just a moment, please. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm going to pause a moment because I am getting feedback in my earphones. Can you all hear me if I speak this way?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I think there is still a technological issue. I apologize, but I am getting feedback, and I'm talking over myself if I keep talking.
We're going to take a 5-minute break as we figure out this technical difficulties. We're looking forward to hearing your presentation, so we're going to figure it out really shortly, and we'll be right back.
Hi, Dana. I was having the same issues that I think other speakers were. Yeah, hold on just a sec. Okay. Testing. Just a sec. This is odd because my mute is on my speaker, and I'm talking to you via my cell phone. Let me think for a minute. I'm not sure what the issue is. It has something to do on the city's end, I'm fairly certain, since all of the other speakers had the same issue. Okay, thank you. Rena, I will write down.
Okay, apologize for all of that. So, okay, this evening we are here to talk to the City Council and the public and to listen about the housing element. Okay, now I got it. Okay, so for those who are in the room, there are hard copies in the back of the room. Hopefully those on Zoom are able to follow along in the presentation. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Janet? Okay, so the objectives for tonight's meeting, we'd like to introduce the housing element, this public draft. We're going to have a brief overview of the sites inventory and new program initiatives. We'll summarize the Planning Commission comments that we received at the meeting last week with our Planning Commission, and we'll hear comments tonight from the public as well as from council members. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have talked quite a bit about the housing element, so we're not going to go over all of the things that this group has already learned, but just a few acronyms that we will see throughout the presentation. ABAG, which is the Association of Bay Area Governments, ADU, Accessory Dwelling Units, AFFH, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. That's going to be an important one to remember moving forward. HCD is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, and RHNA, or RHNA, is our Regional Housing Needs Allocation, which again, this group I'm sure is already familiar with. Next slide, please. Again, so some housing element basics. High level, again, the general plan is a requirement of all cities and counties in California, and the housing element is one of the required elements of the general plan. It's been a required element since 1969. It's updated on 8-year cycles. We are currently in the 6th cycle. That's why you will often hear us refer to the 6th cycle housing element update. This is the only general plan element that requires certification, not just adoption by the local agency, but also certification by a state agency, which is HCD. HCD goes through a process every 8 years to identify the total number of units that are projected to be needed to accommodate housing growth throughout the state of California. And that number is then further whittled down to regions, and then further whittled down to cities and counties. And ultimately, each jurisdiction in the state of California receives an allocation, its share of projected housing growth throughout the state for the 8-year RHNA period, which for now is through 2031. And then once that allocation, the RHNA, has been assigned to each jurisdiction then needs to go through the process of updating the housing element of its general plan and updating zoning to show the state that it has sufficient land appropriately zoned in order to accommodate, at minimum, its RHNA allocation. Next slide, please. Some key objectives of the housing element are to increase the housing supply and mix of housing types, tenure as well as affordability, to promote infill development and socioeconomic equity, while at the same time protecting environmental and agricultural resources and encouraging efficient development patterns and GHG reduction. GHG being greenhouse gas, an acronym that we did not spell out up front. It's also intended to promote interregional jobs housing relationships, trying as much as possible to balance jobs at various income levels with housing for various income levels. To balance disproportionate household income distributions, not having all of a certain allocation at a certain income level in a certain location, and to address past and present discriminatory housing policies and practices. This is where we get into that AFFH acronym. So why do we update the housing element? Well, communities change, and every 8 years is a good opportunity for the city or county to reevaluate its goals, its objectives with respect to housing. It changes in its community. It's also necessary to incorporate and reflect new legislation that may have passed within that previous cycle. Having a certified housing element makes jurisdictions eligible for certain state grants. not just housing grants, but we're also starting to see transportation tied to certification of housing element. In Contra Costa County, that includes your Measure J funds. Having a certified housing element protects against legal challenges and financial penalties. It's also just necessary to maintain a legally adequate general plan, and it facilitates the local jurisdiction retaining local land use controls for development within its boundaries. Next slide, please. And the next slide, please. So this is an overview of the schedule for the preparation of the housing element update for this cycle. The stars on the screen indicate where we are currently, which is in the phase of preparing the draft housing element, engaging the public and getting feedback. And we are also in the process of preparing an environmental impact analysis for this process. And this Planning Commission kicked off that process with a scoping meeting on March 8th. Yes, March 8th. So that process is ongoing. The next two items where you see squares, the council and commission hearings, as well as adoption, are anticipated for later this year and possibly early next year. The housing element, as a reminder, needs to be adopted by the end of January 2023. Next slide, please. So we've had a few opportunities so far for community input with the public as well as with decision-making and advisory bodies, including joint study sessions with the Council and Planning Commission through fall and winter. We had the online surveys, which we discussed in the last item, both the Maptionaire survey as well as the Balancing Act survey. The Planning Commission also had study sessions at their February 22nd and February 8th meetings. And then, of course, with the housing element being released on the 20th of this month, the Planning Commission also had its own comment session at their meeting last week. Next slide, please. Just some of the survey results from Maptionaire are summarized here. I won't go into too much detail about them, but generally there was the majority were in favor of growth, but were concerned about the impacts of that growth on traffic and infrastructure. People are also concerned about changes to community character. Top options for increasing housing supply were ADUs and additions to existing homes. And there was some support for housing in the town center, and particularly along corridors. And again, this sort of conditionally refers to that mixed-use concept that we discussed in the last item. And there was limited support for strategies to address homelessness and affirmatively furthering fair housing. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned, the other survey opportunity was the Balancing Act. There was extensive outreach done for this, and with that we had close to 400 hits to the site, and we had about 44 plans submitted, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when we compare it to some of the other jurisdictions in California that did this exercise, it's actually quite a bit. There was not a lot of support for having a buffer to the RENA. Densities were supported in sites that were more accessible to arterial streets, such as Ignacio Valley Road and Oakhurst. There were some suggestions that we increase density above the 30 units that we set as the max in the simulation. We heard those comments expressed in Planning Commission meeting last week as well. In the town center, densities were preferred to be lower, more in the range of 10 to 20 units per acre, although there was some just flat opposition to any units downtown. And then, as I mentioned, there were some, commenters who suggested that housing might be okay if it was mixed and secondary to commercial. Next slide, please. Okay. Components of the housing element are listed here. And next slide, please. And these are the three that we're going to focus on for this evening. The resources and the sites inventory, AFFH, and the housing plan. So we're really going to be looking at, for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus on these three areas. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the RHNA is broken into different income levels, ranging from extremely low up to above moderate. And each of those income levels is a certain percentage of area median income. So folks who are extremely low income make up to 30% of area median income, and then the tiers stack from there. Those who make above moderate are considered to make 120% of area median income. The RHNA is broken up to allocate a certain number of units or to assign a certain number of units to each jurisdiction for each income level. Again, trying to achieve the objective of the housing element statute to diversify housing and not concentrate certain income levels in certain locations. Next slide, please. There was an initial site assessment that was done. This was actually an exercise that was facilitated through ABAG that allowed cities to just sort of preliminarily identify some potential sites. In the process of doing a site inventory, if the jurisdiction determines that there are not enough sites, then the jurisdiction has to adopt actions that make the sites available with appropriate zoning, or they have to promise to rezone. Promising to rezone triggers additional requirements, including timelines for performance. It's better to rezone in tandem with the housing element update because, as I said, there is a performance period after a housing element is adopted when a rezoning has to be done. Then there are some efficiencies that can be captured if they're done together, the general plan amendments and rezonings. Next slide, please. So here's our preliminary insights inventory. This is going to be a big part of our discussion this evening. These were sites that were identified as being vacant or potentially underutilized, or these were sites for which developers or property owners had approached the city with an expressive desire to develop or redevelop their sites. This map also includes 3 sites that are already entitled by the city, including the Diablo Meadows development, the Olivia at Marsh Creek, and Oak Creek Canyon. These 3 developments total 109 units of the minimum 570 unit allocation. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we take that map and we apply certain densities to it that are visible in your PowerPoint presentation, but not so clear on the screen, I apologize. If all of those sites were to be rezoned or designated at the densities that are shown on the map, then the city would have 891 units that would be accommodated through general plan and zoning. And this table summarizes how those units would be allocated to the different income levels. Next slide, please. So the general plan housing element has sort of tiers to its program. There are goals, which are high-level aspirations. This group discussed those goals at your January 4th meeting. From there, those goals trickle down into policies. Policies provide a little more guidance as to how to achieve those aspirations. From there, those policies trickle further down into programs, and programs are the actions that the jurisdiction commits to doing through the course of the 8-year cycle to implement the policies and the high-level goals and aspirations of the housing element. So listed on this screen are a few of the amendments that are suggested at this point in the general plan and the zoning code. And that includes increasing density ranges, particularly for the multifamily and institutional land use designations in the general plan. and similarly, increasing densities for the multifamily residential zoning districts in Title 17. The next slide, please. Additional components of this proposed draft program include, as I mentioned, looking at the medium density and high density multifamily residential zones and amending the zoning code to allow at least 16 units on a site regardless of density limit and allow residential uses by right. Allow low barrier navigation centers by right on property zoned for mixed use and non-residential zones that permit multifamily housing. Another component of this program is to revisit residential parking requirements and possibly lower them in certain instances, particularly for multifamily, and streamline the site review process to make the process more efficient for property owners who are interested in adding small developments to their site or possibly adding onto an existing single-family home. Next slide, please. In the public draft housing element, and we've already started getting comments back on some of these policies, but the potential amendments in Program F1 would allow increase of residential uses up to 30 dwelling units per acre, prohibit ground floor residential uses along Central, Main Street, and Main Street frontages, and revisit lot coverage standards to ease development constraints and allow more flexibility and development options. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Other key programs in the housing element, Program A1, which supports preserving existing housing stock. Program B1, which is a program that supports standard ADU plans to facilitate ADU production. This is something that the city is actually already working on through grant funding that the city was awarded a couple of years ago now. Consider adjusting affordable housing plan in lieu fees to increase them to generate more revenue for other affordable housing within the city, and to implement more proactive AFFH efforts. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. The housing plan, AFFH concerns and responses. Some of the key concerns with respect to affirmatively furthering fair housing is that there is a preponderance of single-family homes, and having such a large number of single-family homes limits rental and home buying opportunities for modest-income households. There's also limited resources to address instances of discrimination. The responses that are proposed in the draft housing element to address these concerns include increased multifamily residential densities to increase opportunities for rental housing, to increase initiatives or to provide initiatives to encourage ADU production, which I've already mentioned. Also providing for construction of higher density housing on religious institution sites, providing better AFFH information to residents and landlords, and referral of fair housing complaints to county agencies. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the Planning Commission had their public comment session last Tuesday, and some of the comments that we heard last week were to consider higher densities on the church sites, which are close to Clayton Road and Ignacio Valley Road, and as well as the Oakhurst Country Club parking lot site. And where we have currently shown 30 units per acre, the comments were suggested that we increase that to 40 units per acre. There was also a suggestion to reduce density to the town center to no more than 20 units per acre. There was also a request to define more precisely where housing would be allowed in the town center and to maintain town center public parking lots. There was a request that we reach out to the property owners of the Clayton Station commercial sites to inquire about their interest in doing mixed-use development on their site to provide potential housing units there, promoting ADUs, revisiting developer fees, clarify how review processes could be streamlined, which I mentioned earlier. And then there was also a request to strengthen sustainability program components. Instead of considering implementing certain programs, implement certain programs. And next slide. So now it's your turn to talk.
But we enjoyed your talking.
Ask questions. Yes, now it's your turn to talk with questions.
All right, I'll bring us to the council. Council, do you have any questions for our Community Development Director? Yes, go for it.
I have some questions. These are not in order. I was just kind of taking notes as you were going. When we talk about ADUs, there was in the package it talks about the assumption that we're making for ADUs, and I know that we had discussed previously what the criteria was for how much you could use to count in your arena. So is this what we've settled on at this point? I think it's 16.
Yeah, it's about 2 per year, and that's based on permit history for the last 3 years.
So based on whatever methodology that they've come up with, that's what it yields in our use case.
Yeah, that's where we got the 2 per year from.
Okay, cool, got it. These aren't numbered, these pages, however. On this page here, the red indicates constrained sites. What is the criteria for making a determination for a constrained site?
The constrained sites were, looking at the map, these were sites that were geologically constrained, so you can see there's a lot of hillside areas there. There are also some stream corridors, so they're environmental constraints.
Okay, so it's geological or other environment. I'm just wondering what the general criteria would be to indicate, because it looks like there's these red lines all throughout, and I think that's the greenbelt areas, if I recall. So I'm just...
Some of so south of Clayton Road, there's 3 what look like veins, I'll call them.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the creek corridors.
Creek corridors. Okay, got it. Thank you. And then there was a term that was used in the presentation that you had. It was called, you said, a navigation center.
Low barrier navigation center.
Can you clarify what that means? I don't know. I'm not familiar with that term.
Sure. It's a state statute, and Laura can jump in. Yes, she is on. It's essentially a kind of transitional housing. So for somebody who is coming out of homelessness or risk of homelessness before moving into permanent housing.
I see. Okay. I completely was going a different direction with that. So thank you for that. And then on the concerns and responses for AFFH this one. It's just words. What's the source of both the concerns and the responses? Whose concerns and whose responses?
So in chapter 4 of I think it's 4 of the housing element, and again, I'll let Laura jump in at any point here. Okay. There's demographic information that's provided throughout that chapter. The criteria for AFFH requires that the jurisdictions identify whether there are concentrations of certain groups of people in certain locations. Where there is a concentration, a city or county or jurisdiction needs to identify how they are going to reverse those concentrations and allow for those communities to be more diversely spread through the jurisdiction. I'm going to ask Laura to jump in on the AFFH part.
By all means.
Okay. Chapter 7, sorry. Okay.
I'll speak slowly because I am getting feedback and I'm talking over myself. Are you hearing me on the other end? Speaking just once?
We can hear you just once.
Okay. The criteria are based on the analysis that was done using data provided by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we did our analysis based on maps that you see in the AFFH analysis. With regard to the suggestions, those are based on experience that we've had working on similar projects in the SCAG region and knowing what HCD is going to be looking for in the housing element.
Okay, so
Can I clarify a little bit?
Sure.
It sounds, I'm trying to interpret because it's a little difficult. It sounds like these are staff presented concerns and responses. That's how I'm interpreting what Laura had said. I'm just wondering who's having these concerns.
That's correct.
Okay, so staff, our staff. It's not like we submitted it to some external party and then they came back with their concerns and then we responded. These are our own internally prepared concerns and responses. Is that accurate?
Yes, based on the analysis.
It is. So this.
Based on the analysis.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That answers. I was just trying to clarify what the source is. And then a similar question for the items. It's not clearly presented in the handout, but it is in the materials where these do have page numbers, I believe. So let me see if I could scroll quickly to it. It's like in the Housing Action Plan in Section 2, I think. There's a list of items that are labeled like A1 and hold on, I'm rapidly scrolling here.
Those are the programs?
Yes, the programs. What's the source of those as well? Are those also staff prepared? We said that these are like potential actions that we're proposing that we include within our element?
Yeah, so and I'm going to back up a little bit too to your earlier question about the AFFH as well. So yes, this draft on the whole that you're seeing is a product of staff's work. The reason why we're here and why we're doing this public review period for the next 20 days is to get feedback. So this document is a flexible document at this point. We expect that there are going to be some revisions, but this is based on our experience and our knowledge of housing, Laura's expertise working on housing elements in other jurisdictions in Southern California. The concerns, and I think I'm gonna fill in a little bit of the gaps that Laura may have missed on the AFFH question because we couldn't hear her very well. So again, the purpose of AFFH is to address the imbalance in to try to correct past discrimination with respect to protected classes, race, sex, familial status, ability, things like that. There tends to be a relationship between ownership status and rental status, for example, and a relationship between that and race. So where we have a lot of single-family homes, there is a connection between single-family home ownership or home ownership opportunities and race. So there's not necessarily just we think this is a problem. There's actually a statistical relationship between those that needs to be addressed through our AFFH analysis. Home buying opportunities for modest income households. Again, the objective is to try to diversify housing opportunities, and to the extent that some people may be excluded because there is not a diverse inventory to allow them entry into the housing market through smaller units. The objective of AFFH is to try to rebalance that. And then, of course, the limited local resource to address instances of discrimination, that's discussed in Chapter 7. There's not a lot of resources here, so that's more just of an identification of lack of resources.
Okay. Thank you. That answers that question. I just have a couple more. Is there, like, this chart here? This one's pretty misleading, I think, because it's not to scale. So that's not a question, but it is dramatically not to scale.
Okay.
Okay. So then, the table that lists the 891 units, is that broken out anywhere in the materials by site? Because it groups them. I could find like a discussion of those. For example, the projected ADU construction is broken out in table 5-3. The town center sites is broken out in 5-6. 5-4 doesn't tie, it's off by 2, which is weird to me. So I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly.
After this was published, we did catch some errors in the smaller section tables. Yes.
All right, so I couldn't tie it.
No, table 5-9 on page 5-11, that is correct, but that's the entire city.
Yeah, I was adding it up and I couldn't get it.
Yes, we need to clean those up.
Okay. Is that broken out with any more level of granularity? Because like that big map shows the whole thing with all the different colors, and then this has a table that's kind of aggregated into different categories, but there's nowhere that says like, because in our current housing element we have all the numbers listed by parcel. Does that exist, that's available somewhere?
Not in this draft, but we have gotten that comment already, and we will incorporate that.
Okay, thank you. Because I think that will help contextualize discussion, because it's hard to have a discussion when it's aggregated at this level. So I would say that.
Yes, I agree.
And then, okay, so we talked about 5-8, 9 units. How come, so can we, like, you had mentioned earlier that you had gotten feedback about Clayton Station. Are we able to add sites at this point? Because the draft inventory sites doesn't include it. It wasn't included in the survey. Is that still eligible or available to us?
At this point, yes. If there are sites that we don't know about that citizens driving around have thought of, then we can look at those. For sites like Clayton Station that are already developed, there's a little bit more effort that has to go into it, because we have to show that there is going to be, we have to show HCD that there's a reasonable likelihood that that site would be developed or redeveloped in the course of the 8-year cycle. We can't just say, it'd be great if there was housing in Clayton Station, so we're going to plop units on the roof there if the property's not interested in doing it. So we'd have to be able to back that up somehow.
So we have to substantiate that somehow. Okay.
If for a site that's already developed, yes.
Okay. makes sense. I think that's all of my questions. I may have made notes, so I'll do another pass. We'll see.
I found a couple snaglets as well, and I don't know if you've caught them. Like Creekside was listed twice in a couple of the tables, and so I wasn't sure which one was going towards. I think it was counted both in the 5.6 or 5-6 and 5.7, and similarly when you get up to 5-4, we're talking about Oak Creek. We're talking about 18 dwelling units, but I think it's been approved for more. Is that correct? Is that Oak Creek in 5-4? And again, I think that was the challenge, is trying to tie some of these tables back to the actual developments. I found myself going back and forth and trying to label it, and labeling tables like this, trying to do that. It made a very difficult exercise. So giving site names would make this really much easier to digest.
Understood.
The next question I had is, were there any sites that were suggested by residents that were not included in this housing element as sites?
I'm sorry, we were just clarifying, the Creekside consists of 2 parcels, that's why it's listed twice.
Thank you.
But I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Were there sites that were identified by residents via email or otherwise that were not included in this intentionally?
Not since, so the first time we shared this map with the public was back in January for your January 4th meeting. We did not get any additional sites added in response to since then. Last week, as part of the Planning Commission discussion, a couple planning commissioners did identify some other sites they wanted us to take a look at. One is located on Oakhurst and is it Peacock Creek? I don't remember the cross street, but it's off of Oakhurst at the base of Sino Hill. Eagle Peak, thank you. Other bird, a different kind of bird. And then, of course, the other side was Clayton Station. And they asked that we reach out to those property owners of the shopping center and the various smaller buildings there to inquire about their interest in doing mixed-use housing on their sites.
There are a couple larger residential plots out there that are owned by private landowners or 2+ acres. Do we reach out to them and see if they were interested in being included in the housing element, just out of curiosity? One of which I know is close to the development.
Generally speaking, no. If there was development on a site and it was not identified necessarily as being underutilized, if there was already a housing unit on it, we didn't look at it as a potential new housing opportunity site. So short answer is no. But if there are other sites, certainly similar to the Planning Commission meeting, if you know of other sites you want us to reach out to property owners about, we can.
I know it's picayune, we're talking about small numbers here, but little things like conversion of floor square, second floor to a residential, I mean, it's a couple more units. I mean, it's little things like that. I think in the end, as we get to honing this thing, having as many options as possible that are out there, and I mean, I'll throw it out there. I don't know what is financially viable for the golf course, but maybe the driving range would be a great place for some housing. There are things that we just making sure we have all the options looked at. That's all. And a part of this is we get the numbers. I mean, you've got a lot of numbers. I mean, we're looking at 891 units. That's awesome. So we have plenty to work with. But I just want to make sure we're looking at everything.
Yes, we can, if your suggestion is to reach out to the property owner of Flora Square, that is something we can do. Similarly for the golf course, they've actually already been in contact with us about the overflow parking lot site. So it would be a fairly easy discussion to extend that to the driving range if that's something that this group would like us to inquire about.
I just want to make sure we're making sure we have the numbers that we have, and we're able to make some good decisions going forward with what we put forward to HCD, as many options as possible.
Steve? Oh, sorry.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
Yep, I
I just have another question about the ADUs. And I know that you addressed it and said that it's 16 because it's 2 per year because that's historically what we've done. What flexibility do we have to increase that slightly? I'm not saying get radical with it. Because given that we want to, I think it said in here, provide incentives for developers to help build those, et cetera, why would we limit ourselves to only 2? I can see increasing that, like maybe double it to 4. And to me, that seems reasonable. So I know that we didn't want to catch the wrath of HCD, but what flexibility do we have to increase that slightly?
I'm not sure we do. And I'll say that the 2 is based on HCD guidance and also on our consultant experience in Southern California, where they tried to push the number and HCD essentially said no. And our consultant shared with us that on the housing element they worked in Southern California, that jurisdiction tried to do what you're describing and push the number up a little bit, and HCD's response was no. And HCD's guidance has been that permit history for ADUs is the basis for determining for your allocation how many of your units can be credited as ADUs.
So I know that, I think it's Laura's on the line, right? So was the entity or the city in SoCal, did they have ADUs previously, or they tried to go to 0 and then ask for 2 or ask for 4, like they had no history of doing it? I just want to probe a little bit more. Do you understand my question? Okay. We're just waiting for Laura to respond. Okay. Yep.
We have tried in several jurisdictions in the Southern California area
to push on the ADUs because what every jurisdiction is seeing
Oh, I just hung up on her. I did not mean to hang up on her. Okay. Well, that was a bit aggressive, but I'll get her back.
I have heard with other jurisdictions that I'm working with that HCD has provided some flexibility. I think in some of their guidance they've had a 4-year look-back period on how many ADUs have been created per year and had to average that 4 years. And they were allowing some cities in Southern California, because the ADUs have been ramping up more recently, but they're still looking at least at the last year. And from what Dana has indicated, even last year we were still doing 2 ADUs permitted. So it could be challenging to, I think, get any approval beyond what we're already permitting, at least for last year.
But if I'm not mistaken, this process is we give guidance, as does, and then it goes to HCD. They give their input, and then it goes back to the Planning Commission, and then back to us, and then we submit it. So in that process, couldn't HCD just come back and tell us no? Is there any issue with us trying to ask for 4 and or whatever number, and they possibly say yes? I'm trying to understand the harm in trying.
There may be no harm in trying. I would certainly say that at this point in the process, if we've got 800 plus units in the queue for HCD to peruse, I think that's fine. I think it's likely that we'll get a no. I do think that if we were submitting 570s to them at this point, and that included 50 ADUs, that would not be a good strategy. If that makes sense, sort of kind of trying to capture that.
Councilor Wolf.
Yeah, just quickly, how does seismic play into this whole thing? For instance, if you look at a property and it's seismically developable, there we go. For instance, let's take the Oakhurst overflow lot, and we have the Clayton fault runs right under there and through the golf course. Do we discount that? Do we say, well, we can't have X amount of houses there, or how does that work?
Well, there are certain restrictions as far as building in what are called Alquist-Priolo fault zones. So, and that is not one of them. So there may be a fault trace that runs under that, but it's not one of it's not the Hayward fault, it's not the Concord-Greenville fault, it's not the Napa fault, it's not one of the faults that's been mapped. Any development would have to have some sort of geological analysis done for it and the geotechnical constraints, and the building would have to be designed around that.
Okay, because I've always heard that the Clayton fault runs right under the golf course and out into that lot.
Okay. We can take a look at that a little more closely to see if that is a constraint that would make that an ineligible site. But I would say it's not a designated, what we call an Alquist-Priolo fault zone.
Thank you.
I was just thinking, going back to the other thing that we talked about with Clinton Station, has to be, we have to substantiate some interest or, some potential for that to be included. Is that only because it's commercial, or is it any property that's already built needs to, has that same type of analysis that needs to be done?
So again, this is something that I am learning talking to consultants who have worked on housing elements for jurisdictions in Southern California. And keep in mind, Southern California is ahead of the curve on us. Their cycle started last year, so we're learning from them and their experiences as much as possible. But one of the consultants who was working on the Southern California housing element, basically, as I understood it, it's not necessarily just because it's commercial, it's because it's developed. There has to be, it's an already developed piece of property, so there has to be some rationale to support why we're showing it as a potential housing site.
Okay, so that makes sense. Okay. So how does that reconcile with like the Easley estate or the I think it was included in a previous housing element. I don't remember which cycle, the colors. So that was on there, but that already has a unit on it, and it's already built. So, but that's included. So that's
it's not utilized to the same intensity as the Clayton Shopping Center is, and I will say for that as well, I did reach out to that property owner, so that and we'll be meeting with them over the next couple of weeks. So all of the owners of property that are in the inventory, other than the city-owned sites or developers that have expressed the city an interest for building, have been contacted either by letter or phone call or, okay. In the case of Clayton Station, I haven't reached out to them yet because that's a fairly new addition, but the goal is to contact everybody whose property has been identified in the inventory.
Okay, and so, like, for example, if the owner were to say not interested or for whatever reason, then would we remove it from the inventory?
That happened. Okay. This is so challenging. Okay.
Are you getting those from Laura?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. So what Laura explains is that if the site is largely vacant, in the case of the Easley site, it's likely reasonable to include. What did she say? Likely okay to include. But as I said, I did reach out.
Sure.
We are reaching out to all the property owners anyway. Your question again, I'm sorry.
It just seems like a mismatch because while it is large, it's a single family, I believe, or that's how it's being utilized, but it's a large property. But so you could say that yes, it only is, a lower intensity. Is that? However, something like the Clayton Station is not zoned residential at all. So it seems like apples to oranges because there's no intensity possible given the current state. So it doesn't seem like that's, I can feel like there's multiple criteria working at the same time. But I think I get where you're going with this. So.
And I think you had asked, can we take a site out?
Yes.
That happened last cycle, I believe, actually. I think Easley was taken out at the last minute. So yes, sites can come into this is a flexible document at this point. Sites can come into the inventory, sites can come out of the inventory. If a property owner came forward and said, absolutely not, I want my property to be agriculturally zoned because I want the tax benefits or whatever their rationale is, then and they want it taken out of the inventory, then, I mean, this council can decide not to, but that comment would come forth pretty loud and clear, and you'd have to decide what to do with it. But yes, it could come out.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Chilla?
I just have one clarifying question. Thank you. Does Clayton Station only have one owner, or are there multiple owners? So you would have to go to, I'll let you answer that first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe there are multiple owners. I haven't dug deep into that one yet. I believe Safeway owns its footprint. I believe the rest of the shopping center is owned by a management entity or a different entity. And then all of those smaller buildings off of Clayton Road, where the Shop and Go is, there's I'm sorry, what did you say? The cleaners, the tailor.
I thought that little piece was Concord owned. The very front where? Just the shell. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So to answer my question, then there are multiple owners that you would need to contact at Clayton Station to see if this is even feasible. Okay, thank you.
Well, and some could say yes, and some could say no. I mean, it could be a mixture of responses as well, where maybe the owners of the strip centers, where the restaurant is, and Shop and Go, and Travis, maybe some of them say, yeah, sure, I'm interested. I'd be willing to do that, and maybe Clayton Station says no. So we could get a mixture of responses as well. But yes, to answer your question, there are multiple owners in that area.
Looking at the Planning Commission's discussion recommendations, there was an item to put a 40 units per acre overlay on a couple of properties. What if the owner of the property had absolutely no desire to put 40 units per acre on their property, or wanted to develop just a portion of it, and which would be much lower than the count? Let's say we have a 3-acre property. It's a 40 units. That's 120 units, and they had no desire to put 120 units on it. That would be a challenge for us, wouldn't it, as far as being on our inventory?
Well, the 40 units per acre would be a maximum. When we actually get into, so I'll back up a little bit. For purposes of the environmental analysis that's being done, we're looking at most intense scenario across the board, just because that's most conservative, and we anticipate that likely will come in somewhere below that. For purposes of projecting actual unit count under the housing element, we're probably not going to count, if a site is zoned for a maximum of 40 units per acre, we're probably not going to count it at 40 units per acre. We might look at something more like 75 to 80% of that number. So for purposes of projecting what might actually get built there, it's going to be some number less than that per acre. I think that answers your question. I'm not sure it answers your question entirely.
Do we ask the owners of the property what their intentions are? We just put an overlay and say, and use a number based on our formula, is the question.
Well, they have property owner rights. The density ranges are generally going to be ranges. So, I would be surprised, and I would not recommend that any site be zoned in such a way that it is at 40 units per acre, right? Usually density ranges go from 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 25 to 35. They usually run in ranges. So as long as a property owner falls within that range and a property owner is comfortable with that range, then the site can be developed. If the range is 25 to 40, then the site can be developed at 26, 27. I would suggest that there be a minimum, but it's a very unusual situation where anyone or any jurisdiction would zone a site for a specific, precise number of units.
Can I add one thing quickly before you go on? Also, just the issue becomes that one of no net loss and understanding whether it's either across different income categories or the total number of units, that one of the reasons to have a buffer or a larger number is because we need to be able, if the range is 25 to 40 and we think they're going to do 30 and they come in at 25, then, we have potentially counted on more units than ultimately get built there. And so we need to have a way to accommodate those units or units in that income category at another site. So that's the other thing to consider with the density ranges, is that if we set it really high but we don't actually expect anybody to come in at that, then we need to think about, how many units are we going to say are realistic. And you may remember, if you looked at the current housing element, it describes, sort of maximum number of units that could be placed on that site and the realistic number of units. And that helps sort of do what Dana was talking about in terms of kind of matching, both the land use and zoning pieces along with the sort of practical realities that may occur as a part of development.
Vice Mayor Tillman?
What would staff's recommendation be then to help us project density bonus laws being used by a developer then, right? Isn't there the potential for that to happen if they want to exercise that? So if we've got this, if we have the range, and you're saying that it would be 75 to 80% lower, it's possible that it's either at the range or above if they can use the density bonus law. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. A property owner could use density bonus law to get above the maximum end of the range. I would probably suggest or caution against assuming that you're going to get density bonus applied across the board. But yes, it is certainly allowed within state law and local code.
That definitely puts a wild card into some of our discussion, because we learned from 8 years ago what that did as far as Olivia, and changed the perspective quite a bit from what the intention was of the City Council that actually passed the housing element at the time. So it's just something for all of us to be aware of, and I appreciate your bringing that to our attention, Vice Mayor Tillman.
Or is now the time to make suggestions or questions? All right.
Are there any questions from the City Council? Yes, Dana.
I just want to say something real quickly about the density bonus and the application of density bonus. Again, I think it's not applied across the board. I mean, yes, you do have one project in the city that did have a density bonus, but you have in the last cycle, 4 or 5 others that didn't. So I think that's why I say I would caution against assuming that every project is going to come in with some sort of density bonus request. So just kind of bear that in mind too, that density bonus law is out there, but it hasn't been applied to, it's not been applied to more projects than it's been applied to in the city.
Is that a reflection of the type of development that was done, or a reflection that, because we're not seeing that in the single family development, it's more for the more dense development like that particular project was? So would we expect to see a density bonus law applied for higher density developments? I think it's a legitimate question.
Well, density bonus law, again, is intended to facilitate affordable housing development. So if having more units makes a project more affordable to build, affordable housing developments just by definition take a hit, right? Because they're not able to rent or to sell at market rate. And so the reason why they ask for density bonus is to offset some of those costs. If you have a market rate development that fits the market, why ask for a density bonus?
Thank you for the explanation. If there are no more questions from the City Council, let's open this up to public comment. And with that, anybody who is speaking and raising their hands and that can be seen in Zoom land, you have 3 minutes to speak on this particular topic, and we look forward to hearing your voice.
Mayor Clayton, at this time, I do not have any hands raised in Zoom, and I have 18 attendees.
Thank you, Janet. And I don't see any hands raised in our audience. So with that, we'll close public comment on this item 7B and bring it back to council discussion. And if I'm correct, essentially there is no action that is being taken at this time. This is just our clarification, edification. If anybody has any additional work that you'd like to have our staff do on this as they go to the next iteration of this before taking it to the Planning Commission next, is that correct?
The Planning Commission did ask that it come back to them next month. It wasn't our initial plan, but I think because they had less time than this group did to really get through it, we only released this document on the 20th and we went to them on the 24th. They asked for a little bit more time, so they asked for a second round.
And I would like to add something to that.
Please.
Poor Dana, I surprise her every time I move the microphone over. A couple of other things. Ultimately, this will come back, so it's going to go back to the Planning Commission for any further comments and any public comments that come during this time frame, and then it will come back to the Council on June 23rd. As the final draft that we will submit to HCD. So the council will see it one last time. We'll essentially ask the council to, allow us to move it forward to HCD for HCD's first review, and then HCD will have up to 90 days to do that. So that's just kind of the rest of the process picture for this round. And then, of course, it will come back again after we get HCD comments and ultimately for Planning Commission recommendation and council adoption by the end of this calendar year, first part of next calendar year. So that's just a few other process context pieces. Secondly, if there's any direction that the council wishes or comments that the council wishes to give tonight relative to the downtown site, since we did just talk about that, we would obviously take those comments, or if there's a desire to see what HCD says, then that there will obviously be opportunities to come back on that downtown site. Or if, as the Planning Commission did, if there are any other sites other than those that have been mentioned already this evening, that the council would ask that we consider reaching out or incorporating, we would also ask for that feedback as well. So just wanted to talk a little bit more about the context, and then just if there's any specifics on the downtown site or any other sites.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so it is in the current iteration, the downtown site is currently included at 123 total units, something like that. Is that right? And this is the one where the survey said only 7% of people wanted to see housing there.
The Matchinaire survey was, there were...
It was a mix. It was like 7% and then 11% for mixed use. Right?
Yeah, there was a combination, but yes, and then the Balancing Act survey was also, it ran the range of 0 to 30.
Okay, got it. I saw a few other comments. I think it would be great if we could get Randy, you just mentioned that the next time is June 23rd. If there's like a timeline of touch points that will happen for the various touch points on the element. So it's going to go back to the Planning Commission at some date. It's going to come back to us at some date, and then we're going to submit at some date. Like, I think if you probably have that somewhere, but if we have like a timeline of those touch points, I think it would be informative for me, but others as well, maybe, if they are interested in getting involved at those touch points, if that's something that's easy to produce. And then, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but in the materials, it did talk about modifying the height constraints that we have, I think, in certain areas. Does that ring a bell?
I believe it's in one of the programs, D2.
Well, I don't know the letter, but okay, I'll go with that.
Yes, let's go with that. I like D, is for Dana.
I don't like that one. So if you guys like tall buildings, then that's cool. But my suggestion would be to not have that in there. I do think the greater density in certain areas that would support it is a good idea. But that's going to be site specific, I think. But then we'd have to also have the appropriate zoning to align with that too. So that seems fine in certain areas, I would say. With the context that you had mentioned earlier, given that the owners need to be amiable to that for it to be realistic. So if they are, then I think that would be cool too. And then can we talk, so I saw here, I think the site's on Pine Lane, that's like the pumpkin patch site. It was listed on that one yellow and red table as constrained. Is that included in the other table that I don't recall the number? 8.8 or 5.8 or something? 5.9, sorry.
It is in the inventory. It is. I understand what you're showing. The ABAG map, which is our sort of first flush pass. Yeah, that was our first flush pass at identifying potential sites. It is shown as red, but it is in our inventory.
Okay. Is that one of the sites that you've been in contact with the owners of?
I've sent them a letter. I've not heard a response yet so far.
Okay. I see them every day.
Okay. I
can just ask them if you'd like.
Sure.
To reach out to you, that is.
Yeah.
But so there's no challenge because it's in ABAG's constrained sites?
No.
Okay. And that would fall in the residential site one, the one that's on table 5.4, the 343 number.
And more specifically on table 510, it's the Marsh Creek property. I think it's M, if I'm remembering which property it is correctly. So the sites are listed in those subsequent tables toward the end of that section. So 5-10, 5-11, and 5-12. You were asking about that. I didn't want to, interrupt earlier when we sort of had gone past it. But those tables they don't provide the totals, which we will add as well. But it does identify in, sort of underutilized or, vacant, et cetera, sites, and includes the site names as well as the letter designations. So that's where that site shows up in the inventory.
Okay, it's just listed as underutilized. I got it now, okay. Because the old firehouse was also, I think there was commentary around the old firehouse. Isn't that currently carry the same zoning that the downtown, some of the downtown sites have as multifamily high density?
Yeah.
And so that would be underutilized?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's all I got.
You actually bring a point up I'm kind of curious about, because constrained sites, which were very well marked next to creeks and steep hills. One of the primary concerns I read about was, and it's out there in any dialogue about additional development, was our available resources relative to water and sewer and the ability to support any additional housing in a drought, et cetera, et cetera. Can you comment on how that impacts any decisions we make at all relative to the housing element?
So that's part of the analysis that's going to be done with the environmental report. So part of what the EIR will need to look at is public services, not just police and fire and schools, but also public facilities. And would construction of housing units under the housing element require extension of services, additional new utility lines, physical changes that may affect the environment to accommodate that development? Likewise, any specific development that would come in, we would need to do that analysis as well. To the extent that it was already done in the EIR, we can use some of that, but we would need to look at the project as well. I mentioned this during this Planning Commission meeting. Diablo Meadows is an example of that, where the analysis was done and determined that there needs to be a new water line and there needs to be a new sewer line, and those facilities were added as part of the project by the developer.
If I could add as well, certainly what we heard from ABAG in the appeal hearings was that there is no real concern about water and sewer and any other potential constraint, and that the entities, the water district, et cetera, need to help plan for that, and it's all of the jurisdictions facing that same thing. So I don't think we're going to get a lot of I don't know that sympathy is the right word, but I don't think there's a lot of flexibility that will be granted associated with those things. We did make the argument in our appeal that because we don't control our own water, sewer, anything, that we have less ability to define whether or not we can accommodate growth, and that was entirely unpersuasive to any of the entities. So I suspect that we're going to not get a lot of relief from that avenue on a standalone basis. I don't know whether larger, issues will arise, but that certainly was the messaging at the time.
We're not going to run out of water. They will just charge an amount that no one will be willing to pay. And then you will still have water that no one will use.
One of the things I just going through the data, and that's it was awesome to actually get into the data from Balancing Act and a lot of questions that were asked. 42% of the people who answered in Figure 1 don't want any housing. But if you get down into the detail, the larger percentage of people want their children to be able to afford to live here, or they want people who work in Clayton to be able to live in Clayton, which is figures number 26 and 27. And you go a little further, they want to provide more housing for older residents, which is figure number 28. When you look at this data and the answers to the data, it seems very incongruent. So I don't think we're quite sure exactly what we want. No housing, but other things we want to. It just acknowledging that we're in a flux period right now where we're trying to figure out what exactly we want, and this housing we're putting forward is part of that process. So I just throw that out there. Is there any other comments for discussion at this point from the City Council? If not, do you have the comments you need to move on to the next part of the housing element? All right. Go for it.
Sorry.
Council.
It kind of piggybacks off of what Jeff asked, although I do see that the dates are listed in here on when it happens, but I do have a clarifying question. So The public can give their comments, including us, if we have something else between now and June 20th. It's going to go back to the Planning Commission on the 14th of June, is that right? Okay. And it's going to come back to us for final approval before it goes to HCD on 6/23. HCD is going to give us their comments at some point, you said, before the end of the year?
They have up to 90 days
90
to give us their first round comments.
Okay, and then and then how long do we have after that to get back to them? Is that the end of the year after that? So they've got 3 months, so that takes us, that's July, September, into September, and then what?
And then we will make revisions according to HCD direction, and we would come back to the Planning Commission. We could come back to the Planning Commission at that point to ask them to make a recommendation. They'd have to consider the environmental analysis that was done as well, and then their recommendation would move back forward to this group.
Yes, I'm just wondering if there's anything additional that we as a community would like to input. We have time after the September 30th before we finalize it at the end of the year.
The Planning Commission recommendation as well as the City Council ultimate decision will both be public hearings.
Thank you.
HCD has 90 days. How long do we have after that?
There's not really a statutory time limit for how much time we have to respond, but we do need to try to hit that January 31st, 2023 deadline to adopt it.
Did you say January 31st?
Yes.
Or first, okay. So that's the ultimate drop dead date.
That's when we need to have an adopted housing element. And then it goes back to HCD to ask them to certify it.
So if we get our response in the September timeframe or earlier, we make whatever revisions come from that and we resubmit, can they then come back to us again and say, try again?
Possible.
And then we still have that January 31.
Yes, you adopted something by January 31st, and they could come back in April or whenever they finish their next review and say, we need to make some more changes. In my experience, and Laura can, well, I guess kind of weigh in her own way. She's doing the best she can, and I appreciate very much that she's even doing this. But in my limited experience, she has more experience than I do with various housing elements. When it came back from HCD, there was not a major overhaul of comments. It wasn't, no, your whole housing element's garbage, throw it away. Because, of course, by that time, they've gone through it once already. So usually if you have changes after the adoption, they're, manageable.
Okay, cool, thanks.
I will say, though, that there are a significant percentage of jurisdictions in Southern California who, despite the fact that they've passed the equivalent of their January 31st, 2023 deadline, which was this year, do not have compliant housing elements because HCD is still going through revisions with those jurisdictions. So, it was like something like 170 out of 190 or some, I think it was even worse than that, did not yet have a compliant housing element. So we can expect to try very hard to have the compliant element all done, adopted, and approved by HCD by January 31st, but they do reserve the right to continue to ask. Only 6 jurisdictions in SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, met the deadline. Because of HCD.
Any other comments from my fellow council members? With that and the comments you've heard, we will close item number 7B and move on to item number 8, which is adjournment at 8:29 p.m.